Welcome to this PSSA practice lesson. When you take the Science PSSA exam, there'll be two types of questions. There'll be multiple choice questions and constructed response questions. This lesson is going to focus on constructed response. In this lesson, we will talk about what is a constructed response, tips for answering a constructed response, samples, and then when we're finished with this lesson, you're going to go off and do a practice assignment which includes a constructed response. A constructed response question is a question that asks you to answer it in paragraph form. So unlike multiple choice where you just have to fill in the space, a constructed response you have to write out in full sentences your answers to the question. When you come to a constructed response question on the PSSA, read the question carefully and note the type of information your response should contain. Your response should address all of the specific points the question asks for. And finally, before you begin writing your answer, you can create an outline to organize the information for your response. This way, you'll make sure you don't miss any of the specific information that the test is looking for. Before we get started with the samples, I'd like to go over the scoring guide. You're going to need this scoring information for this assignment today, as well as when you take the PSSA exam. Constructed response answers can be scored a 2, a 1, or a 0. Now that may not seem like much, but this can affect your total score greatly. So each constructed response will get one of these points. If you get a 2 point on your constructed response, that means your response demonstrates a thorough understanding of the scientific content, concept, or procedures required by the task. That means that you thoroughly or fully answered all parts of the constructed response question. You gave the scorer exactly what they were looking for. If you receive 1 point on the constructed response, it means the response demonstrates a partial understanding of the scientific content, concepts, and procedures required. This means that you answered part of the question correctly, but may have missed one section of the question, either leaving it blank or answering it incorrectly. So if a question is broken into 2 parts, make sure you thoroughly answer both parts. If you receive a 0 on your constructed response, it means you provided insufficient evidence to demonstrate an understanding of the scientific concepts, content, procedures required. This means you either didn't answer the question correctly at all, or you skipped the question. So here's a helpful tip. Make sure you don't skip any of the questions on the PSSA exam, because this could really affect your final score. Do your best and try to include all the information to answer the question as thoroughly as possible, and aim for that 2 points each time you do a constructed response. Here's a sample PSSA Science constructed response question. Describe 4 ways that infectious diseases can spread. Give an example of a disease that spreads by each method. Now look at this carefully and think about, what is this question asking me? What's the specific information? And how many parts does this question have? This question asks for a specific number of descriptions, 4. You are also asked to provide an example for each description. You might begin your answer by listing the 4 ways infectious diseases are spread. Then you could go on to explain each item in your list in further detail. You should end each description with an example. So in order to get the full 2 points on this question, make sure you answer all parts of it, giving 4 descriptions and then also an example of each description. Let's take a closer look at a PSSA question and 3 ways it was answered and scored. The question is, an experiment is set up to investigate how different ramps affect a ball's speed. Use the figures below. Part A, Create a question that could be tested using these two ramps. Part B, state a hypothesis that could scientifically test the question. Our next few slides, I'm going to show you examples of answers to this question that were scored a 0, a 1, or a 2. This student answered Part A. Create a question that could be tested using these two ramps. This student's question is, are the two angles different? Well, that's not a question that could be tested. Part B, state a hypothesis that could scientifically test the above question, and his answer was, it is different than two angles before. Now, I'm not sure that's a hypothesis, and it's not testing the question from above. So what do you think this student received? A 0, or 1, or a 2? If you said 0, you'd be correct. There's insufficient information in both of these parts to answer either part. Let's look at a different student's response. Part A, the question they created, which ball, when dropped off the ramp, will have a greater speed? Well, that could be tested, couldn't it? Part B, their hypothesis was, my hypothesis is the second ramp, or the one on the bottom, the ball will have a greater time and distance. Well, that hypothesis is testing time and distance, but their question at the top was talking about which one would have a greater speed. So let's think about what the scoring would be for this question. If you said 1 point, that would be correct. There's partial credit given here. Part A is correct. They got credit for Part A, but their hypothesis was not testing their question in Part A, so they did not get credit for Part B. And here's one more example. Part A, which ball will travel the farthest after rolling down the ramp provided? Well, that is something that we could test. It's in a question form, and we can test that. Part B, the ball with the steeper ramp will go farther because the ramp is steeper, and then the ball would generate more speed. That's a hypothesis that we could scientifically test by using a ball and two ramps. This student would receive 2 points, which is full credit, for thoroughly answering both parts of the question, Part A and Part B. Okay, now it's your turn. After this video, you're going to answer the question posted in the forum. Remember to answer both Part A and Part B. After you answer the question, then you're going to score one of your classmates' responses with a 0, 1, or 2. Remember, 2 points is a thorough answer, 1 is for a partial answer, and 0 points is given if it was really an insufficient answer or not complete. Good luck!